Welcome everybody, and thanks for joining us for this special webinar brought to you in partnership with the Open University Business School and the Campaign for Learning. Can someone type in yes in the chat area if you can hear me okay? I'll carry on. My name is Janet Barker and I'm the External Engagement Manager here at the Open University Business School. I'm delighted to be hosting today's session and equally delighted to be joined by Laurie Knell, who is an Associate Lecturer at the Open University Business School, as well as Director of Strategic Innovation Partners and co-founder of Brain for Business. Over the next 30 minutes, we want to share with you some of our perspectives and thoughts on modern empowerment in the workplace, and we hope you'll find this interesting and thought-provoking. If you'd like to learn more after the webinar, there is a link for a free online course in the resources section of the auditorium. This webinar is being hosted in the run-up to the National Learning at Work Week, which takes place in May and is coordinated by the Campaign for Learning. It is an annual opportunity to celebrate and promote the benefits of workplace learning. All sorts of organisations will be running activities during the week, including the Open University Business School, so I hope you'll be able to join us then. Over the next 30 minutes, you'll be able to interact with us. You'll see on your screen a chat panel. We invite you to share your questions there. We'll try and answer as many of those as we can. And if you're having trouble with your connection, please try refreshing your web page. Just as a reminder that this webinar will be recorded and available online after this session. So if you have any colleagues who would have liked to have joined in, you can share this with them. Right, it's over to you, Laurie.
Thank you very much, Janet. It's good to speak to you all. My name is Lawrence Knell. I am an Associate Lecturer with the Open University, as Janet said. And like a lot of Associate Lecturers with the Open University, I also run my own business. And what that means, I think, what the real value of that is that we're stepping back and forth between the world of academia, really exploring some of the great and interesting ideas that are coming out at the moment from the world of academia, but also looking at how they apply and how they're relevant in the world of organizations, whether we're talking businesses, government departments, or for that matter, anything else. And clearly today is very much about what is a relevant topic for many in organizations, both leaders, employees, members of staff, but also people working in human resources in learning and development functions. And that is, of course, empowerment. So over the next 30 or so minutes, as Janet said, we're going to be talking about empowerment, but focusing particularly on four key questions. First of all, what is empowerment? Secondly, why it's important. Thirdly, thinking about some current trends in empowerment. And from there, thinking about what organizations, and particularly people from a learning and development human resources background, can do to support positive empowerment. Personally, I welcome questions as we're going along. So please feel free to drop questions or thoughts or comments into the box, and we'll do our best to address them. And I should also apologize if you hear me coughing and spluttering at any point. It's to do with an early spring cold that I've picked up. So sincerest apologies if that interferes with the flow of things. So where do we start? Well, I'm going to share with you a quote. Something that someone once said to me many, many years ago. And that person said to me, while I am your manager, you are fully empowered to make any decision you need. Sounds great, doesn't it? But here's where it got a bit more complicated. Because she then continued, as long as you run all those decisions by me first. Now, this manager of mine was very talented, very capable, and has had a fantastic career, but unfortunately she wasn't gifted with a sense of irony, and I don't think she actually realized the contradiction inherent in what she was saying. How is it possible to be fully empowered and yet have to run things by a manager or for that matter anyone else? And I think that's one of the great challenges with empowerment. It sounds great. We all want to be empowered, and if we all want to be successful, particularly as managers, it makes sense to want to empower other people. Yet, what is it really? There's a lot of confusion, a lot of misunderstanding. So let's think then about what empowerment actually is. We can break it down into two key forms. What could be called firstly structural empowerment, but then secondly psychological empowerment. And importantly, these two forms of empowerment, they're not mutually exclusive. They coexist, and in fact, they can reinforce each other. So let's have a look at what they are, starting first of all with structural empowerment. Structural empowerment has to do with decision making. It's about sharing the decision-making authority with the people who are working with you, pushing decisions down to where they should be made so the employees are empowered to make decisions within the scope of their job, within the scope of their role. And in that sense, it's characterized by very much participative decision-making. It's giving the people who need to make those decisions the right and the opportunity to make them when they need to make them. And it's pushing that power up and down the chain of command, along with the information that goes with them. But the key word here is very much caught in the second bullet point I have there, scope. We're not asking employees to make decisions about a different division or a different department or something with which they're not familiar. We wouldn't necessarily be asking a finance manager to make a decision about what happens in human resources, or a human resources manager to talk about what a new marketing campaign will be. It's very much within a scope, and it's empowering people to make those decisions within the scope of their authority. The second form of empowerment, though, is psychological empowerment. And this focuses very much on the beliefs that people hold about their job and their employer, how they feel, what their perceptions are. And in that sense, employees and people working with organizations, because it's recognizing as well that not everyone working with an organization will be an employee. They might be a contractor, or they might be a volunteer, or they might be some other form of stakeholder. They're encouraged and invited indeed to identify with the purpose and the values of the organization. And in that sense, to develop their self-belief in their competence to carry out their role and to deliver what is expected. Key to that is giving people a sense of autonomy. So people have a sense that they're able to do the role and that they're given the power and the authority to do it with the way that they feel is best. Now, critically, empowerment is not engagement. So if we think about what engagement is, there are three key facets. So we can look at the work-related energy and resilience, how much effort people put in. So dedication, how involved people are, and how much of a sense that people feel that the work they're doing has significance. And then thirdly, absorption. So how focused on and enjoying the work people are. And this very much links to the psychological form of empowerment. So in that sense, while empowerment and engagement are different, engagement links very much to the second form. Not so much structural, which is about decision making, as I said, but more psychological empowerment. The challenge then can be how to actually do something with that, how to implement that kind of model. And Steve Jobs was known for lots of great quotes about lots of very relevant and appropriate things. But one comment he made, I thought, was particularly apposite here. And he said, it's not the tools you have faith in. Tools are just tools. They work or they don't work. It's the people you have faith in or not. And I sometimes suspect that in the modern era, people do and organizations can almost fall in love with technology. Isn't the iPad great? Isn't the latest phone great? Isn't the machine brilliant? That 3D printer or whatever it is. Yet, as Jobs reminds us, someone who is innately connected and innately linked to so many of these different tools that we now take for granted, actually it's the people who make the difference. And that's where empowerment becomes particularly important. But we can also go beyond that. And we can also recognize that something like empowerment matters because it can support productivity. If people are engaged and if they are working harder and if they want to be there and if they're making that extra bit of discretionary effort, things like productivity should, hopefully, increase. But equally, if we link that back to, say, structural empowerment, if the person on the ground dealing with a particular problem is empowered to make the decision, surely that decision will be made much more rapidly than if they have to pass something up the chain and then wait for an answer to come back. Clearly with modern technology, that happens much quicker, but still, it can lead to a delay. Things like job satisfaction, a more positive culture, better outcomes, profitability should all stem from this, along with, hopefully, a positive employer brand and creativity and innovation, as people are empowered to make those decisions and feel more committed to the organization and want better outcomes, not just for themselves, but also for their colleagues, for the teams they're in, and for the organization. Now, that all sounds great. If we could all achieve that, if our organizations could all achieve that, I think we'd agree the world would be a much better place. But let's look at how one organization in particular has taken that and put that into practice. You're probably all familiar with the hotel chain, the Ritz-Carlton Group. And they have an interesting article, and I've included the link here if you're curious to look it up, where they talk about the 7 advantages of employee empowerment. This is an organization that has taken empowerment and tried to put it into place and into practice as a key part of what they do. And they see 7 key advantages. First of all, employees are more accountable, they're more attentive, they feel more valued, they're more invested in their work, so they actually care more, problems are resolved faster, customers experience better service, and the organization is more nimble and more agile. I think we can all agree they're pretty good outcomes. At the same time, though, we can look at that and say, well, the Ritz-Carlton Group, it's hotels, it's customer service. And our organization, maybe you work in manufacturing or a government department or professional services or whatever it might be. You might say, well, that's not necessarily directly relevant to what we do. Yet if you think about it, in many ways, hotel groups are unique because there are so many people and they're often not necessarily directly with a manager. If you're thinking about someone who might be going around, maybe they're housekeeper, or maybe they're serving food, and they don't have someone they can necessarily directly refer to if a problem arises. Yet for that particular customer, in that particular moment, it's a real problem. If the person who is looking after them is empowered, then you can see how actually the outcomes would be better if the person is able to say, you know what, here is a solution. This works for you. It works for us. It's the right thing to do. So it's easy to see how those advantages are real and those advantages are genuine. Now, we do need to remember that, of course, it's not all positive. And that can be from the fact that in many different situations, employees feel the need to go beyond, to work harder, to not let the organization down. Because let's face it, if I've been given all this discretionary authority, this decision-making power by my organization, then I have to use it wisely. And so it can lead to other less than satisfactory outcomes, overwork, stress, and so on. Worth bearing in mind, but it's not our focus today, but I just wanted to mention that. So what role can human resources and learning and development play in supporting empowerment? Well, there's a number of key things, and we're just going to look at these quickly because there are 3 aspects of organizational life in particular that I want to focus on. Some key areas, some key things that HR and learning and development can play. First of all, I think support managers. I think this is a key one, that whether it's a business partner role or putting in place the structures to allow managers to grow and develop in order to empower their staff, but also to be empowered themselves. And in that sense, it links very much to supporting the desired management behaviors. People should be doing the right things, not just any things. Tolerating mistakes. Somehow the fly-ins haven't quite worked here, so apologies for that. It's all tolerating mistakes. It's allowing people to try this and recognizing that it's not always going to work. Sometimes people will do their best, and yet things won't necessarily work out. So decision-making might be given to someone, or decision-making authority might be given to someone before they're necessarily ready for it. So understanding and tolerating that. It's creating a safe environment as well, though, where people can try, where people can make those efforts. And linking to the next one that was meant to come up, tolerating mistakes. Developing a learning organization is key as well, where people are encouraged to learn. Things like communities of practice are developed to enable to learn from each other and to share their knowledge as empowerment spreads through the organization. People don't feel they need to stay just within the little box of their role, their department, or division. But as I said, there are 3 specific areas that I wanted to touch on. And those are leadership, teams, and then finally, creativity and innovation. And I think each of these has direct relevance for every organization these days. So let's have a think about leadership and what does empowerment mean for leadership? Well, first of all, we can recognize, and I'm sure we can all agree, that the world is too complex for simple directive leadership. We can't know everything. Leaders can't know everything. And the days when the leader felt that they necessarily could, or that people expected the leader to know everything, they're long gone. And in that sense, so leaders know less than they think. Despite recognizing that, people will still fall the trap of thinking they know more than they do. And consequently...
Laurie, can I come in here? I think I've got a quick question, if you don't mind taking it.
Of course.
Yes. It's interesting you should talk about the leadership of expecting leaders to know everything. I would worry about company culture. I mean, for instance, and creativity. When you think about a company like Google, I think they thoroughly encourage their employees to be creative and make these brave and bold decisions that many other companies wouldn't. Whereas if you compare them with the civil service, for instance, where I should imagine everything's very process-driven and hierarchical, how in this day and age could we advise managers and leaders to get over this way of, the set in the box thinking? What would you think about that?
Well, I think that there's a couple of things there, Janet. Thanks for the question. First of all, it's recognizing that command and control is no longer acceptable socially as much as anything else. It doesn't get results anymore, if it ever did. So organizations and leaders need to understand they need to step away from that kind of approach. Standing at the front telling people what to do is no longer acceptable. It is very much so about a cultural change. And I'm very reluctant, and I'm always very cautious when people say, well, that organization, whether it's Google or whoever, they're doing something, so shouldn't we do that as well? Or what's the latest trend? What's the latest fad? Because they are different organizations. Every organization, every culture, every industry is by definition different. What I would suggest, though, is that we can rethink the types of leadership that are practiced within organizations. And one that I would particularly want to suggest is called distributed leadership. And this is about pushing leadership, not just, say, decision-making down within the organization, but pushing leadership down through the organization, where leadership is exercised by, as Ancona and Blackman say, by multiple leaders throughout the organization, some in formal positions of authority and some not, working collaboratively across organizational levels and boundaries. So it's about recognizing the individual organization's context, finding a culture and a model that works for them, but also bringing in some key aspects of new leadership styles that are going to be relevant and involve people and engage and empower people. And I suspect that distributed leadership is something which is key to that. Now, on a certain level, distributed leadership is a relatively new context, grows out of education, but actually its historical antecedents go back hundreds of years and have often been seen in military organizations where things are very, very spread out, and you can't always know and you can't always communicate. And I think there are some interesting lessons there for all of us in organizations. So I hope that answers the question there,
yeah,
Janet.
thank you, Laurie. And I particularly am interested in the distributed leadership aspect of things. Thank you for that.
No, you're absolutely fine. Well, what I think it also links the two, though, because once you're pushing leadership out within an organization and developing leaders at all different levels, it also means the teams that they're working with, the teams that they're leading, are going to be perhaps a bit more self-managed, a bit more independent. So the question of self-managing teams becomes more relevant. There's been a lot of talk about self-managing teams over the last number of years. SEMCO in Brazil has for many years been used as a case study in a lot of master's degrees and business degrees. But growing out of the tech sector, we've seen things like holacracy and other new forms developing. And I guess the question to the audience more generally is, are self-managing teams a response to the challenge of empowerment? And are they indeed the solution? Does anyone have any particular thoughts on that?
We're just having a look for you, Laurie. Just bear with us. There's nothing coming in yet, but I'm sure that people will start typing and answer you soon, Laurie.
I hope so. Hopefully that doesn't mean that nobody is out there.
Oh, there is. Do carry on.
Well, if I were to perhaps to answer that, I would say that self-managing teams will almost inevitably be a response, but they won't necessarily be in the same way that might happen under a holacracy, as you might see in Zappos or a lot of other tech companies, but more as a slightly changed form, relevant to the individual situation and circumstances of different organizations. So government department might have a self-managed team, but that's going to be very, very different to a manufacturing organization, which is going to be different to a sporting representative body, and so on. So there's lots of different ways of looking at it. And finding the right answer is going to depend on the organization and the context. The next question, though, I wanted to ask, and this is really just putting the question out to the audience as well, is, can empowerment support greater creativity and innovation? If people are allowed to have ideas, and if people feel, whether it's through the structural forms of empowerment or psychological empowerment, that they're now not just allowed to have ideas, but encouraged to have ideas because they have that sense of ownership within the organization, does that mean that creativity and innovation will thrive? Well, I would suggest, based on the research that I've done, the answer is yes, but also no. Because it takes a lot more than simply saying to people, please go off and have ideas, or you're now allowed to think, for new ideas to develop. Creativity and innovation require more than just empowerment. It definitely helps. If people are told to sit in the box and not think, then new ideas aren't going to emerge. Or at least if they do, they're going to be stifled. It's really interesting when you hear even people like James Dyson talk about circumstances where in organizations that Dyson worked in, he was told that he shouldn't really come up with new ideas. And you see what happened with him. He got to a position where he went out and developed his own business from there.
Absolutely. Laurie, Elizabeth has said, unfortunately, I think we always need some form of leadership and accountability, as sometimes someone needs to make the ultimate decision. I totally understand that. What's your view on that one?
I would actually agree with you. I think there is nothing wrong per se with leadership, and there is nothing wrong with having a person who, has the buck stopping at their desk or at their laptop or whatever. Where I think the challenge is if that person is the only person who can lead, and is the only person who is allowed to lead, or is the only person who lets other people lead. It has to be much more flexible and fluid and dynamic to meet the demands of the modern world.
Indeed. What if the leader goes on holiday, etc.? Yes, absolutely. Lynn has said absolute empowerment supports innovation, but only if mistakes are recognised as part of the process.
Yeah, and I think it's that recognising mistakes, and there is an interesting balance to be had, I think, when it comes to failure and mistakes in organizations. And I don't want to go off too much of a tangent, but there's a concept some of you may have heard of called intelligent failure, or a second concept which is kind of related called intelligent fast failure. And it's saying it's okay to make mistakes and it's okay for things to fail, but you want to make sure that those failures aren't so big or the risks so great that they jeopardize the entire organization or company or project or whatever, that they're small and they're managed. And that's where I think you're empowering people to make mistakes and failure within a certain limit. I think that is key to me.
Thank you, Laurie. If you'd like to carry on now.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Because I think the next point, the next question really, and I'm very much open to people's comments here, because we could ask, what is the future of empowerment? I think empowerment as a concept is here to stay. It's not just a fad. It is something that, particularly when you look at the younger generations coming through, they want to be empowered. They want to have a voice. They want to have a say. But there are nonetheless many open questions. What forms will empowerment take? We've talked today about structural and psychological empowerment, but will there be other forms emerging, or will those two remain the high-level umbrella forms? Will future generations look for something different? But also, will future generations, and indeed will our generation, all benefit from empowerment, or is it something that will only apply, for example, to knowledge workers or to people above a particular rank within an organization, or however else you might want to split things out? And that then brings to the final question I've put up anyway, as a question to the audience as much as to anything else. Who is going to feel the benefits? Because it's very easy to say that empowerment is great for employees. You're now allowed to make decisions, and we want you to feel part of this organization and committed and so on. But actually, there's a lot of positives there for the employer if staff actually don't want to go home because they want to work 16 hours a day. Yet that's a very short-term view, because if the people are working ridiculous hours in the long term, then their performance is going to fall. But there's actually, I suspect, a lot of employers who may, want that kind of commitment. So there's every positive has a negative that goes with it, and it's possibly about balancing those, make sure the balance isn't too far either way. What do people think? Does anyone have any particular thoughts or comments on any of these questions?
Laurie, there has been a comment from Sharon, which I think is a very good point. Sometimes people don't want to be empowered and view this as managers not managing. Yeah,
absolutely. I think equally you could make that accusation at organizations that it's about organizations absolving themselves of responsibility for putting in place structures and organizations and letting people sort out themselves. I suspect that, as with anything, a poor manager may well use it as an excuse not to manage. And that's where organizations and organizational structures need to be very careful to make sure that isn't the case. Okay,
we're nearly out of time, but I do want to just, I hope everyone doesn't mind if we run over slightly, because this is a fascinating subject. We have one more comment. It's good to encourage people to feel their ideas are valued, and that new ideas will be included in business planning, leading to creative solutions in difficult times. But the problem is people are not allowed to fail. So I think what this attendee is saying is that perhaps you put your ideas out there and they're not adopted. Hopefully that's my understanding of it.
But and I think it perhaps links back to the earlier comments I made about intelligent failure and intelligent fast failure as much as anything else, where there is that risk. People should feel they're able to talk about ideas and bring them up. Doesn't necessarily mean they're always going to be developed or relevant or better than other ideas, but everyone should always feel enabled and empowered to come up with ideas.
Yes,
so
I'm going to let you move
as Janet
on
said,
now,
that's fine. No, you're absolutely fine, Janet. So just to wrap things up, we've covered a lot of territory in a very short space of time. But to pull it together, I want to kind of just include two quotes from American General Patton. And he made two very relevant points. First of all, don't tell people how to do things. Tell them what to do and let them surprise you with their results. So it's saying, don't tell people how, for example, if your organization needs to cut or save 5% off the budget, don't tell them what to do. Tell them, okay, how to do it. That's our goal. And let them be creative. Empower people to work things out for themselves, because you might be surprised at how they do it. But then equally, if you tell people where to go, but not how to get there, you'll be amazed at results. You don't need to micromanage. This goes back to the earlier comments I made about command and control leadership not being enough anymore, if it ever was. Give people space. People are smart. People are well educated. People are well trained. And while, of course, as has been pointed out in the comments, there are always going to be some people who don't necessarily want to be empowered, there are a lot of people who are. And it's not about organizations stepping away from their responsibilities or from managers. It's about getting the best out of people and creating the context and the environment for that to happen. So I'm going to quieten down now. Janet, over to you. Any other questions or thoughts from anyone in the audience?
I think we've had so many, Laurie, that we just can't go through them all now. But I'd just like to say thank you so much, everybody, for a fascinating discussion. And thank you, Laurie. I'd just like to point out that we will be having the Learning at Work Week webinar. So please join us for that session as well. It's a free lunchtime webinar during Learning at Work Week. How empowered are you? So it's a very good lead on. Why should you and your employee I'm reading this badly. I do apologize. I'll start again. How empowered are you? Why you and your employer should care. So I hope you can join us on Monday, the 14th of May. The registration's open. So I think it just leaves me to say thank you, everybody. And thank you, Laurie. It was a truly fascinating session. Thank you.
Excellent. Thank you very much, everyone. Thank you, Janet. And I look forward to speaking to you all soon.